Hey everybody, what's going on? It's James here, and I thought I'd sit down and shoot a video today. It's Friday, May 9th, 2025. Been a while since I shot one, and I have an interesting viewpoint that I thought I would share with you. Now, I'm going to start this video by saying that nothing in the video today that I'm talking about has anything to do with the current price of Bitcoin. This is a long-term outlook, a macro outlook for Bitcoin. A lot of people come to me who did not get involved with Bitcoin early. Then they're surprised to find out that I'm not a Bitcoin believer anymore. I was. In 2017, I was. In 2018, I was. In 2019, I mostly was. In 2020, I started to pivot away from being a Bitcoin believer. And I say this as somebody who still holds cryptocurrency. I still hold a few percent of my net worth in cryptocurrency. I hold that because I hedge against being wrong. I did more research recently. And it's kind of interesting and almost embarrassing to share this, but I'm going to share it because I think it's important for people to understand. I started out, my Bitcoin journey started earlier than most people's. Originally, it started in 2011. I used to mine World of Warcraft gold, all right? Or I used to farm it, same thing as mining it. And so a friend of mine in 2011 came to me and said, you should mine Bitcoin. And I didn't know what Bitcoin was. Of course, we had that conversation. And I did my research and due diligence and found out that at the time, Bitcoin was selling for about $11 a Bitcoin. But it cost me $9 if I wanted to mine it. So my thought process was, this is a lot of headache to make $2 a Bitcoin. I didn't think about speculating or holding it. It never occurred to me. So I passed on the opportunity to mine Bitcoin. Fast forward to 2014, January 2014, Bitcoin was up to around 1,000 or so bucks. It had its bubble pop. And I got back into mining Bitcoin, but this time I actually started mining it, but just on some gaming computers. So nothing too hardcore. Then some stuff happened in my real life and I got distracted and forgot about it, lost the keys, blah, blah, blah. Wasn't a bunch of Bitcoin. I have no idea how much it was. You're talking maybe like 0.01 Bitcoin or something, like not nothing, but yeah, like maybe $1,000 a Bitcoin in today's value. All right. So come back to it in 2017, that's when I started getting really into it. And I started my journey by buying a tiny bit of cryptocurrency, like $5,000 worth. And then I started a mining farm, right? I started mining cryptocurrency. Wasn't a big farm or anything, wasn't commercial farm. It was about a $30,000 investment. Had like 40 something GPUs mining. So you would think that as somebody who started mining crypto that I would understand this work, but I never really looked into it that much. Right? I mined it and then I wanted to learn when to sell so that I could, better time my sells with my mining. So that's how I began trading, was because I was like, I need to know when to sell what I'm mining. So I started trading and then obviously pivoted away from mining to just trading. So I start looking into this more recently. I don't know why, I did. And this store of value narrative that has been around and proven incorrect many, many times now over the last several years, it has a fatal flaw that even the people who are evangelizing Bitcoin seem to completely overlook. And that is the way Bitcoin is set up. The network is secured by miners, which most people seem to understand. Those miners make money by mining Bitcoin and then selling it on the open market. Most people understand that as well. And every 4 years, we have a halving event roughly, and the rewards go down by half, which in turn means the price has to go up and essentially double so that the miners can continue to operate at a profit. The most recent number I saw said something like the cost of production is around $80,000 to $88,000 right now per Bitcoin. So Bitcoin has to be above that for them to be profitable. So you have to ask yourself, what happens if Bitcoin price doesn't keep going up? Because eventually it won't, right? This is pretty much agreed upon by everyone who knows finance. Everyone agrees, even the most bullish people agree that Bitcoin will eventually top out. And if it evolves and survives, it will become a global asset class and probably top somewhere around $1 million of Bitcoin. Okay. Giving it a market cap similar to gold, which is what this article is about and what spurred this video. Right. He's not the only one saying this. This is a well, respected viewpoint in the bullish community, is that $20 to $30 trillion is what they're shooting for digital gold. Right. And even this article is just so silly. They're cherry picking a 5-month time span and saying that gold has fallen less than the stock market. That's the stupidest shit ever. Bitcoin has fallen less than the stock market. What has Bitcoin done every time the market sold off? Can somebody remind me? Yes, it's overreacted and sold off harder. We'll get into that. All right. So here's the problem with all this. And we're going to look at a Bitcoin chart too. The problem with all this is it's not if, it's 100% when. At some point, Bitcoin will not be worth enough to offset the cost of mining it just by selling the Bitcoin. And so the miners have to make money a different way. And the way that they make money is through fees, transaction fees. Stores of value don't have a lot of transactions because they're just sitting in storage, essentially. So if everyone just sits on their Bitcoin and no one's using it to buy and sell goods, there's no fees being generated. And if there's no fees being generated, miners aren't getting paid, miners go out of business, and eventually the network itself collapses, and the network is what secures Bitcoin. Without the network, Bitcoin becomes useless. In other words, it goes to zero, right? Because all of a sudden 51% attacks become a very real possibility where people can basically fake transactions and things like that. So this is a very real problem with Bitcoin. It can't exist as a store of value in the typical store of value sense if it was to evolve. Right now, it's not a store of value anyway. It has to become a means of paying for goods and services. Now, there could be technology invented that solves this problem, and it could be like a layer 2 solution that solves this problem. So maybe that happens. But the point being is, even if that happens, Bitcoin's not really a store of value in that sense. All right. So when you read articles and when you watch videos and stuff of people saying Bitcoin's a store of value, this is one of the reasons that I'm so skeptical of Bitcoin, and one of the reasons that I'm such a cynic, because Bitcoin is really, and people are going to hate me for saying this, and again, this isn't got anything to do with today's price. Bitcoin is a giant Ponzi scheme. And it's the most transparent Ponzi scheme in history. I believe historically, we will look back and be like, how did that even happen? Because when you look at Bitcoin, how does Bitcoin work? How does a Ponzi work, right? Early investors are paid out by new investors. So a Ponzi survives as long as new people are buying it, so that the Ponzi can pay out the early investors and keep the charade flowing. How does Bitcoin work? Bitcoin has to pay its miners, and the only way it can pay its miners is if people keep buying Bitcoin, aka new investors. If new investors stop coming into Bitcoin, in other words, demand dries up, miners stop getting paid, okay? Because miners are going to be dumping on the market, which is creating supply, and if there's no demand to absorb it, it'll crash the price. It's literally a Ponzi. Now, it may not have a Ponzi owner like most Ponzi's. I'm not saying that it's an evil Ponzi, but it's designed as a Ponzi. And so it has to overcome that to become a store of value, okay? So I'm not saying it can't do that. Again, I think there are bridges that it can cross that would make it a legitimate, an asset class. But the store of value narrative, be very careful about buying into this, because right now, I believe that Bitcoin in its current state, if the stock market holds up, I believe that Bitcoin can still hit $200,000 this market cycle. So here I am doing this video that sounds like I'm ultra bearish, and I am long term, right? 10, 15 years now. Like by 2040, if Bitcoin hasn't solved this problem, I think it ceases to exist. But right now, it doesn't matter, right? Short-term speculation doesn't matter what happens in 10 years. Like that doesn't affect today. I still think Bitcoin can hit $200,000 in this market cycle if stocks hold up. But if stocks don't hold up, all right, that's the other side of that coin. You need to use logic and use historical precedents to make your decisions. I'm not telling you what decisions to make, but just consider this. Bitcoin has only existed in a global bull market. It was born after the last major recession, right? Major recession being around 2007 to 2009, where people had a distrust for governments. And so it was the perfect breeding ground for Bitcoin to be born. And it's survived in this environment of quantitative easing and low interest rates and high speculation, which has allowed it to thrive. But every single time there's a hint of trouble in the stock market, Bitcoin panic sells, okay? For example, just in recent history, in 2018, some of you may have been in the market, some of you weren't. This was grinding sideways for months, and a lot of big figures, not me, I was actually calling for $3,100, but a lot of big figures, I think 3,200, were calling the bottom, saying the bottom is in, you should be buying, blah, blah, blah. But then toward the end of 2018, the stock market melted down temporarily, and Bitcoin immediately puked an additional 50% down. It was already down at that point, and it had already fallen. Look at this, over 70%. But then that little scare in the stock market sent it down another 48, no, more than that. Put it on the wrong candle, sorry. Another 50, 52%, just because the market got a little bit shaky. Then we go to 2020, and everybody should remember this. Stock market started getting shaky because of COVID, sold off like 30, 35%. What did Bitcoin do? Oh, that's right. Sold off 60%. Complete overreaction. That's not how a store of value behaves, guys. Then we go to 2022. We had this really short bear market in stocks. Lasted about a year. And what did Bitcoin do? Right? The market, again, sold off. Here's a monthly chart. In 2022, we basically had about a 37% pullback in the stock market. What did Bitcoin do in that same time frame? Anybody know the number? It sold off 77%. Complete panic, overreaction. That is not store value behavior. Just because this article wants to cherry pick 4 or 5 months of history when there's no panic right now, that doesn't make it legitimate. This is not a store of value. Every single time the stock market has trouble, Bitcoin sells off. It's a speculative asset, which means it's really good for making money. If you get in on the right time, it's really, really good for making money. Okay? Bitcoin literally changed my life. It's so good at making money. But if you look at it as gold, as a store of value, you're very likely going to be very disappointed in the short term, because if you never sell it and the stock market crashes, I firmly believe Bitcoin will crash at least 80, if not 90%, in the event of a global recession, like something similar to like the 2008 financial crisis. I believe we see Bitcoin crash at least 90%. Okay. And if you hold it long enough, like 10, 15 years long enough, and the miners start going out of business and the network becomes compromised, you could lose everything. So my only spin in this video is this. Long term, make sure you understand what is required of Bitcoin to survive. And short term, make sure you understand that Bitcoin has not proven itself as a store of value, but rather a very, very opportunistic speculative asset. Which, if you want to make money, guys, it's better to be speculative asset than store of value, right? I don't know about you, but I don't want to buy an asset and try to make money on it when it goes sideways, which is really the ideal goal of the store of values. It just keeps up with inflation. It doesn't really gain a whole lot, it just keeps up with inflation. People will point to gold and be like, well, look at how well gold has performed. Gold has performed horribly, guys. Horribly. And they'll say, no, James, gold is $3,000 an ounce. And it was only, $1,000 an ounce a few years ago. I will point out this. I own gold. I bought gold at $1,600. I posted charts on my social media telling people that I was bullish on gold at $1,600. The last couple of years, it's been great. But if we adjust gold for inflation, here's the non-adjusted chart. If we adjust it for inflation, gold is barely worth more today than it was in 1980. 45 years ago, we just now reached that all-time high on gold, okay? You want speculative assets because those are assets that have asymmetric risk. You want an asset where you can put in $100 and potentially walk away with $10,000. If Bitcoin becomes a store of value, people are going to lose interest in it because it's not going to be fun to put in $100 and make 140, or to put in 100 and make 200 in 5 years. That's not exciting to people. What draws people to Bitcoin is the emotional, fear of missing out, the FOMO, which is literally market mania. It is a telltale sign of a market bubble, and it makes people irrational. It makes them see articles like that article on Bitcoin and just completely put aside all basic math skills and say, yep, that's what's going to happen. It's going to be worth $1 gajillion someday. They misquoted that guy in that article, by the way, which is really shitty of them. If I pull this back up, if you actually watch what he said, this is not what he said. They quoted him as saying that this is going to make people worth 10, 20, 30 trillion dollars by buying 500 million Bitcoin. That's not what he said. What he actually said in the interview, in all fairness to him, was that he thinks if all these things happen, it will make people who are worth billions start buying Bitcoin. It won't make them, people who are worth trillions. It won't make them trillionaires. It'll just make people, more like governments who are already worth that, start buying. Because obviously there are no people who are worth $10 trillion. There are no trillionaires in the world right now. At least not that I'm aware of. So yeah, I thought I'd do this video. Again, short-term guys, here's my secret sauce. You guys have seen this if you watch the channel the last few years. This is the very same chart that I posted in November of 2021, right? When I called the market top and said that it looked like complacency. To me, this chart is still playing out beautifully. And to me, when I look at this chart, this is Bitcoin versus the QQQ. If the stock market does not melt down, this still has a lot of the same signs as optimism. This phase right through here, which leads me to believe that Bitcoin, again, all bearish macro theories aside, that we could be entering the parabolic phase in the market cycle, which is what will send Bitcoin from 100,000, currently 103,000, up to 200,000 by the end of 2025. More specifically, I think it gets there by October of 2025. I think the only way it doesn't happen is the stock market sells off. If the stock market rolls over and sells off, which is possible, right? This could be a complacency phase right here, where this is literally going to be a complacency bounce like this. If that happens, I don't think Bitcoin hits that target. But if this takes out this high back here, this is the QQQ, the tech market, I think Bitcoin hits 200K in this cycle. So like when I'm selling off Bitcoin, and I have sold off quite a bit of Bitcoin this cycle, I don't know if I mentioned this video or not, but I sold off about half of the Bitcoin that I had remaining at a cost average of just over 95,000. So again, Bitcoin right now is 103,000. So I sold mine off around 95 or so. I'm okay with that. I'm totally okay with that, because if it does go to 200, then I'll sell the rest of what I have and my cost average will be around 150. I'm perfectly okay selling Bitcoin for 150 that I bought under 2,000 bucks. So that's Bitcoin that I've been holding since 2017. I'm paying myself, right? And if it goes to $1 million after that, that's fine too. Like woulda, coulda, shoulda. I mean, if we play that game, I'll go back in time and say woulda, coulda, shoulda. Instead of doing my mining thing, that literally lost money after taxes. I should have put that 30 grand into Bitcoin at 1,500 bucks Bitcoin. I would have had 20 Bitcoin and I'd be worth, $2 million today. And, I should have mined it in 2011 when I first looked at it. I should have mined it in 2014 when I started mining it. I shouldn't have lost my keys. And that's a dumb game to drive yourself nuts playing that game. I've learned over time, pay myself, be happy for the gifts that I receive, and don't be greedy. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. As always, please remember I'm some guy sitting in a spare bedroom and nothing in the video is financial advice. You should always go out and do your own due diligence and seek out professional financial advice from a licensed financial advisor for making any type of investment in cryptocurrency, the stock market, precious metals, Forex, or any other tradable asset. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and leave me a comment. I don't do a lot of videos, but when I do them, I try to provide lots of value. And I'm also one of the few people out there who invites counterpoints. If you have a different point of view and it is fact-based, I am more than happy to hear you out. I would love for you to leave that in the comments and say, James, so this is why I think you're wrong. Here's the facts. Here's the stuff that, supports my view. Don't be one of those guys that's just like, you're an idiot. You're wrong. You're wrong, right? Don't be a cult member. Think for yourself. If you have proof or evidence that supports your theory, I would love to see it, because I wish more people would have done that in 2020. Because if you guys watch this channel in 2020, you'll know that I called the $4,000 bottom. I predicted I actually predicted 55 to 75,000 for the top. I was spot on, probably one of the best calls in crypto ever. And yet I didn't cash in on it because after COVID, I got cold feet and started second guessing that and became very, very bearish. And I had people yelling at me in my comments, you're a friggin' idiot. But no one ever just said, hey, James, have you stopped to consider, the effects of quantitative easing and what that's going to do with interest rates? I didn't understand interest rates because I was still fairly new in 2020. I'd only been trading for 3 years. And if somebody was just pulling out, hey, James, typically what happens in these situations is the government lowers interest rates and they have what's called quantitative easing. And these things help to, recover the stock market. And, have you considered what will happen if the stock market recovers? And I may have looked at that and said, oh, wow, that's a very real possibility. Maybe I shouldn't be so bearish. But people didn't do that. They just yelled at me and screamed at me. And of course, some people just agreed with me, which is even worse in some ways because it served as confirmation bias. And I traded Bitcoin all through that bull cycle, but never accumulated any. The only Bitcoin that I had that, like, for selling was the Bitcoin that I had since 2017. So instead of making millions of dollars, I made hundreds of thousands of dollars. So again, if you have a different viewpoint, I'd love to know about it, especially if it is fact-based and evidence-based. For example, maybe you're smarter than me and you know why level 2 is going to solve this problem of Bitcoin transaction fees. Or maybe you know something else that I don't know about how that store of value could work. I'd love to have a conversation with you if you do. All right. Everybody take care. Hope you enjoyed the video, whether you're watching it on the weekend or during the week. I hope you have an amazing day and, quite frankly, just an amazing life in general. Life is good. We're all lucky. We're on the internet, watching YouTube, making YouTube videos, and trading cryptocurrency. It could be so much worse. Take care, everybody.